At his absolute peak, Vikram commanded vast, flawlessly cultivated fields, fleets of heavy machinery, and unmatched regional wealth. He operated under the conviction that his success was entirely self-generated. He frequently told the village that he alone wrote his destiny, and that the entire community relied on his success to survive. This sense of superiority led him to treat those around him as obstacles or tools. He mocked the smaller farmers for their struggle and treated his laborers with a harsh, aggressive lack of respect. By actively severing his connections to the community, Vikram created a vacuum around himself. He sat at the center of a massive estate, but without any incoming advice or outside perspective, he was effectively managing his empire in total isolation. When an ascetic monk arrived, he warned the village that pride is an enemy that blinds us to our own limits, and that those who believe they are untouchable are often the closest to falling. Vikram merely laughed. An empire built solely on one person's ego is brittle. Without a network of varied perspectives or shared responsibility, the entire structure lacked the internal resilience needed to withstand a major external shock. To maximize his profits and stroke his own ego, Vikram aggressively planted a completely unfamiliar, highly lucrative exotic crop. Veteran farmers in the region act as a living database, holding generations of knowledge regarding soil limits and erratic weather patterns. This communal expertise usually acts as a safety net for any large-scale planting. Vikram ignored historical data and the consensus of his peers, focusing exclusively on glowing projections of potential profit. When locals warned him the crop was unsuitable, he ignored them. In doing so, he turned off his early warning system. Initially, the strange seeds flourished into vibrant green crops, seeming to validate his reckless gamble as he openly gloated. This early success was a dangerous illusion. When a high-risk gamble produces a quick win, it reinforces the delusion that the gambler is smarter than the market and that standard risks no longer apply to them. Vikram had systematically dismantled the first pillar of his farm's stability, its ecological intelligence. His massive investment was now entirely vulnerable to the first sign of trouble. Then the external shock arrived. A drastic shift in the weather triggered severe storms and an entirely unexpected pest invasion. Because he had ignored the village elders, he had no plan for these specific pests. The foreign crop, unsuited for this environment, had no natural defenses and no human intervention to save it. In just few days, the heavy rains and the swarm of insects turned his prized fields into a graveyard of rotting vegetation. The entire harvest was wiped out before he could even attempt a recovery. The failure cascaded into his labor force. Vikram had spent years mistreating his workers, and with no loyalty to a man who had only shown them arrogance, they abandoned the farm the moment the crisis began. He was left with millions in idle machinery. Without the human labor required to salvage the remaining soil or prepare for the next season, his high-tech equipment was nothing more than expensive scrap metal. The financial reality was immediate. With zero production and massive overhead costs, Vikram was crushed by a debt spiral that left him with nothing. The collapse was the inevitable result of a complex system losing its support structures. By stripping the farm of both communal knowledge and labor loyalty, Vikram left his empire with no way to absorb the blow. Vikram stood alone in the mud of his ruined fields. The illusion that he was a self-sufficient force, independent of his neighbors and his environment, had finally been corrected by reality. When the monk returned, Vikram didn't laugh. He wept, finally admitting that his own pride had blinded him to the warnings that could have saved his livelihood. The monk's lesson was simple. Making a mistake is part of life, but pride is the barrier that prevents us from learning. It stops us from hearing the advice we need before the disaster strikes. This realization triggered a total shift in how Vikram operated. He understood that a farm isn't just a business for one person, but a node in a much larger, interconnected community. He actively consulted village elders, treated his returning workforce with dignity, and shared his remaining resources to slowly rebuild. Sustainable success is always built on humility. True resilience isn't found in individual wealth, but in the strength of the relationships and the shared knowledge that support you when the storms inevitably come.